Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid, the most famous homesteading channel on the entire internet that has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with homesteading. I know, right? I don't know. Couldn't have made it happen if I'd have planned it. So anyway, a lot of folks been hearing you missed the Bigfoot Sasquatch videos. You miss hearing my stories. Well, today I'm going to satisfy both of those desires by reading you one of my Bigfoot Sasquatch stories. Why after the long break? Well, I guess I feel reinvigorated. I just returned from a vacation. It was a beautiful vacation. We went down to Savannah, Georgia. That was our hub. Now, we were there for almost a week, 6 days, and we went to Hilton Head. Yeah, Hilton Head Island to spend time on the beach one day. Then the next day we toured beautiful, historic downtown Savannah. Then the next day we went to Tybee Island in Georgia, about 40 minutes away from where we were staying. We camp at KOAs. It's real cheap. Makes these trips cheap. Affordable. I'll use that word. It was beautiful. Tybee Beach. All of Georgia was beautiful. Then the next day we did the river walk. Spent all day down on the river walk in beautiful Savannah. Gorgeous trip. Feeling good. Got some sun, as you can tell. So I just feel like telling a story, reading a story. It was interesting being that far south. As you can see, some of the blossoms are out. This is an eastern red bud, and this right here is an apple tree. But most of the leaves here are still just in bud form or tiny little baby leaves. Down there in Georgia, everything's already in full bloom. It was 90 degrees while we were down there. It was wonderful. And I'm wearing a coat now back in Virginia because it's 46 degrees today. But it's supposed to be 90 at the end of the upcoming week. And winter's gone, winter's done, and I love spring, so it's all good. But anyway, my long-winded point of that is I feel reinvigorated, whatever the word would be. And so I don't mind telling you a Bigfoot Sasquatch story, one of mine. This one comes from Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Anthology 1. This is volumes 1 through 10 combined. There's 15 completed volumes thus far. This is the single biggest collection of Bigfoot Sasquatch stories in the English language's history. Yeah, that is, guys, I don't know if you knew or not, but the actual term is no longer Bigfoot or Sasquatch. It is now Bigfoot Sasquatch, and pop culture is accrediting that to me. So just another accomplishment that I couldn't have planned, or I would have screwed it up, I'm sure. But I now am giving credit for combining the terms, because I never knew what him, her, it, or they wanted to be called, and I didn't want to offend him, her, it, or them. So I just called it Bigfoot Sasquatch. I guess it finally caught on. So anyway, everybody was butthurt about it. I'll tell you, the Bigfoot Sasquatch community, man, you talk about a bunch of Debbie Downers and negative Neds who take themselves so seriously they can't even laugh at a joke, brah. They will stalk you. They will, like, literally stalk you. Like, watch, here's an example. Some people call him Bigfoot, or her, or it, or them, or they. Some people say Sasquatch. Yet he never minds. I'm not looking for Bigfoot Sasquatch. I'm looking for the Bigfoot Sasquatch bona fide believers, brah, who says this is no laughing matter. Listen, if you can't laugh at yourself, how can you laugh at everybody else? I love laughing at everybody, so I laugh at myself. All right, this story is very tightly based on fact. It's a story which comes out of Volume 2. It's called Swim Fan. It was originally titled, I Saw a Bigfoot Sasquatch and It Ruined My Life. What? Why 2 titles? Some stories are just that damn good, and this is one of them. All right. By the way, you can get these volumes on Amazon. You can get this Anthology 1 on Amazon in e-format. But if you want a print copy, you got to go to our Etsy store. The link's in the description box. And the benefit to that is that I autograph it for you before I send it out. Now, with no further ado, as my beautiful bride dearly, aka Giggly Girl, would say, let's get to the story. You're on the air, go. So, am I on the air now, live, or is this being pre-recorded to be played later? You're on the air, live now, go. Nick hated his job, and he didn't even need the money, but he had to work per the judge's order. Nick was on probation for a year for his first DUI conviction. He hoped it would be his last, but who knew? The whole 12-step program thing wasn't really working for him because, admittedly, he wasn't working it. That, too, had all been judge-ordered. So, I know Bigfoot Sasquatch is real because he tried to rape my girlfriend back in college. Go on, Nick said to the caller, sounding interested but totally rolling his eyeballs in the privacy of his AM radio station's small booth. The radio station's office was in a spare room above a shitty little regional bank. It was triangular shaped due to the building's design, but it worked. Just enough space to serve the station's 20,000 weekly listeners and growing, hopefully. I swear to God, it wasn't me. I'll tell you that, the caller said. I didn't touch that bitch, and she was just trying to ruin my life, and that's exactly what she did. And it was that goddamn Bigfoot Sasquatch's fault for helping her. Next caller, Nick said, hanging up on yet another psychopath as he saw it. And please, folks, let me remind you to watch your language when we're live. My grandmother's listening. It wasn't true. Nick's grandmother had died when he was a very young child, but Nick was good at lying, all part of the job. And it wasn't the belief in Bigfoot Sasquatch that he was lying about. He never claimed to believe or disbelieve. He figured anything was possible. The dishonest part came in pretending to give a shit about what the people who called into the show, his show, were calling about. When Nick's very rich parents found out their very rich son was being ordered to work, they called Nick's very rich uncle, who owned a radio station, and hit him up for a favor. Nick's very rich uncle jumped at the opportunity to help his favorite nephew, little Nicky, because he agreed with Nick's parents that Nick would absolutely not get some kind of labor job. Nick, despite being born into privilege, never took advantage of his circumstances, and he went to college, never took advantage of his circumstances and went to college or picked up any specific skill sets because he figured what was the use. His grandmother, who had died when he was a young child, had invented waterproof cameras. She'd been an avid photographer and scuba diver, so it was highly unlikely anyone in the family would ever have to work for many, many, many generations, unless they were dumb enough to go out and get a DUI. So here Nick was now, hosting the Bigfoot Sasquatch Hour for his very rich uncle in his little studio, putting up with total weirdos as he saw it, but at least keeping his probation officer off his back in doing so. Am I on the air, the caller said. You are, Nick said. Go. Is this Nick? The one and only, Nick said, rolling his eyes, but not as outrageously as he had toward the rapist. I know what you're doing, the caller said, and I don't like it. Oh, Nick said, hoping not everyone in the whole damn listening area knew about his DUI. Not that he cared, but still. So what is it that I'm doing? You're making fun of those of us who believe in Bigfoot Sasquatch. Never heard that before. I've never done that, Nick said, surprised at hearing the defensiveness in his voice. That's not who I am. And he was actually being honest about that. He never got his jollies off by making fun of anyone for any reason. He just liked to drink beer and watch sports. You're trying to pit believers and non-believers off against each other so you can sit back and laugh as we argue. Who is this? Nick said. It's none of your goddamn business who this is, the caller said, just before Nick hung up on him due to his language. Okay, Nick said, if you guys don't cut it with the language, I'm going to have to play some previously recorded phone calls. And that's no fun. So please watch your mouths. Remember, my grandmother... Nick got lucky. No one else cussed for the rest of his shift, and he was able to kill the time in a much more relaxed way. An uh-huh here and an uh-huh there, here and there, everywhere and and his shift was over. How in the name of God can you listen to those idiots without laughing your ass off? Nick's best good beer-drinking buddy, Quinn, said as Nick got into the passenger side of Quinn's car. Quinn was really good about taking Nick to work and picking him up and taking him back home afterward. Nick had also lost his license for a year due to the DUI. It helped that Nick was paying Quinn for it. $100 a day, plus all the free beer the two of them could drink together, which was a lot. Nick knew he could possibly be given a piss test at any time, and if he popped hot, he would have to serve the rest of his time in jail. He had 3 months to go, and he figured he'd rather be in jail than stay sober. What was the difference was how he saw it. My uncle would fire me, Nick said, reaching into the cooler between his feet and then opening up a can of Devil's Backbone Vienna lager he'd pulled out of it. None of that Bud Light shit for Nick. That was for rednecks and hillbillies. Besides, he said after taking a long swig, I've heard it all. That last guy, Quinn said, pointing to the radio and then shutting it off. A fucking Bigfoot Sasquatch kept him from being able to sell his house because everyone knew there was a Bigfoot Sasquatch in the area. So he got foreclosed on and his finances have been shit ever since. He tried to make it sound like Bigfoot Sasquatch ruined his life. I get so much of that Bigfoot Sasquatch ruined my life shit, Nick said, and then he took another drink. It's all the same. People claim to have seen Bigfoot Sasquatch, then they tell people about it, then they're written off as crazy, and they have no friends, and their wives leave them. They try to make it sound like seeing a Bigfoot Sasquatch is as shell-shocking as going off and fighting in a goddamn war or something. Oh, Quinn said, reaching into his front pants pocket as he made the turn onto Willow Road, which would take them to Nick's house. Rather, Nick's parents' grand estate, on the back part of which had been built Nick's house 10 years before, when he'd hit the age of majority. He still spent quite a bit of time at Mommy and Daddy's, though, especially around mealtime. Some guy said to give you this. What's this? Nick said, taking the folded piece of paper Quinn had handed him. He opened it up and read the handwritten note aloud. I know what you're up to. Nick only had to think for a millisecond before remembering the caller he'd spoken to earlier who had accused him of making fun of people who believed in Bigfoot Sasquatch. Who the hell gave you this? Nick said, turning his head to face Quinn. Some dude, Quinn said, about 10 minutes before you came out. What did he look like? Nick asked. Did he tell you his name? No name, Quinn said. He looked about our age, white guy. I'm not gay, but I'd say he was good looking. And he didn't tell you his name, Nick said. That's pretty much what no name means, Nick. Nick's family estate was around the next turn. The two men finished up the short remainder of the trip in silence. Once there, they went into Nick's house. He referred to it as a cottage, as his parents did, even though it was 5,000 square feet. And they got shitty drunk while watching some sports team score more points than their opponent in some game. You're on the air, Nick said, nursing a hangover by drinking a Bloody Mary. Sure, it was night already, the next night, of course, but Nick and Quinn had stayed up until the sun had come up drinking. So time for Nick and the lifestyle he led, and Quinn as well, since becoming Nick's best friend shortly after moving to the area a year ago, was irrelevant. Go. There's a freaking Bigfoot Sasquatch right outside my house right now, the caller said. Nick could hear the fear in the man's voice, and he often wondered how these Bigfoot Sasquatch people could be so convincing. Were they having some sort of psychotic episode when they supposedly saw these 8 feet tall, 800-pound creatures? Nick was convinced that had to be it. Either psychotic episodes or they were on drugs. Nick sure did like his weed, but he couldn't remember ever seeing Bigfoot Sasquatch after smoking up a big fat bowl. What is the Bigfoot Sasquatch doing? Nick asked, trying to keep the caller on the line. 1 hour was a long time to fill, and Nick had found that the key to burning it up the best way was by keeping the callers who were willing to talk and who didn't use profanity when they did on the line for as long as possible. It's ruining my life, the caller said, right now as we speak. Can you please explain to our listeners how, specifically, the Bigfoot Sasquatch that's outside your house is ruining your life? Nick said. He never got a straight answer on this one. Well, the caller said, sounding really nervous, he cost me my job. How, Nick began, did the Bigfoot Sasquatch outside your house cost you your job? I haven't been able to go to work for a week, and my boss called me today and fired me for excessive absences. That's how. How is it the Bigfoot Sasquatch kept you from going to work for a week, Nick asked. Because he's right outside my house, the caller screamed in the phone. I can't go outside and get in my fucking car and go to fucking next caller, Nick said, wishing he'd hung up just a little sooner, at least soon enough to have missed the second F-bomb. I bet you thought that guy was a blast, an eerily familiar sounding voice said on the other line. Who is this? Nick said. You know who I am, the caller said. "Ah," Nick said, remembering where he'd heard the voice. "My mystery caller from last night. You're the guy who thinks I'm pranking everyone." "That's right, buddy boy. And I know that I know exactly where you are right now." "You and our up to 20,000 other listeners," Nick said, trying to sound brave, but feeling a little creeped out. "You know what I think would be funny, Nick?" the caller said. "If you ran into one of those creatures one dark night and he ripped your legs off and beat you over the head with them." "That's not a very nice thing to say," Nick said. "You have no idea what these people who've actually seen these things have gone through," the caller said. "Their lives have been absolutely destroyed. And you sit up there in your little C-budget radio station and make fun of us." "Wait a minute," Nick said. "I get it. You just said us. So obviously you've seen Bigfoot Sasquatch too." "Of course I have, you idiot." "Okay," Nick said. "How about instead of calling me and accusing me of doing something I'm not, like making fun of our loyal listeners and insulting me and wishing violence upon me, why don't you just tell us your story? Where and when did you see the Bigfoot Sasquatch? Under what circumstances? And most importantly, how in the name of God did it ruin your life?" "Keep laughing," the caller said. "Bigfoot Sasquatch might not show up and give you the ass whooping you deserve, but by God, I will." And then the mysterious caller hung up. "Just so you'll know, guys," Nick said, his voice riding over the sound of the dial tone from the disconnected call, "we have the ability to trace our calls. We can find you. It's not a good idea to call and make threats of violence with 20,000 witnesses listening in. Keep that in mind as you're calling in. You don't want the boys in blue showing up at your house." But that was all bullshit, and Nick was scared. He was texting away to Quinn as he was speaking the words over the radio. "Don't worry," Quinn texted back almost immediately. "I'm in the parking lot and I heard the call. That crazy son of a whore will have a baseball bat waiting on him when he gets here if he's dumb enough to come." Nick felt instantly relieved. He had no idea what forces in the cosmos were at work when Quinn had decided to uproot from his normal day job in Akron, Ohio, the type of job where they actually gave you 5 company polo shirts instead of 3, so you wouldn't have to do laundry until the weekend if you didn't want to, a little more than a year ago, and move into Nick's community. Further, he had no idea how the cosmos had arranged for Quinn to replace one of the guys on the lawn crew his family had used for years shortly after Nick had gotten his DUI and had started working at the radio station, but he was thankful it happened. And Nick was thankful for that first day that he'd met Quinn. The first day Nick had met Quinn when Nick, had been binge drinking by the pool, and he'd asked Quinn if he wanted a beer, and Quinn said yes, and he did take a beer, and he did drink it, and he did not return to work with the rest of the crew, because he felt it was more important to drink a beer with the customer's adult son, and Nick knew he'd found a kindred soul. And when Quinn did get fired by the lawn crew boss for drinking with the customer's adult son instead of mowing grass, Nick did hire him to be his private driver. Nick and Quinn had been inseparable and rarely sober since. "So what in the hell do you think this guy's deal is?" Quinn asked Nick on the way home. Nick was already pounding down the brewskis. "I have no fucking idea," Nick said. The mysterious caller who alluded to hurting Nick had not shown up at the radio station, rather the bank, with the radio station in the broom closet upstairs. Either that or he had shown up, but when he'd seen Quinn's car, he decided not to stick around. This is what Quinn thought, at least, and he'd said as much to Nick. "Why do you think that he thinks that you're making fun of people who claim to have seen Bigfoot Sasquatch?" Quinn asked. "Gee, I don't know," Nick said. "Maybe because I fucking do?" Quinn was silent for a moment, confused. "Wait a minute," he said. "I thought you were like agnostic about the whole Bigfoot Sasquatch thing, that you didn't even care if he, she, it, or they exist or not." "I am," Nick said. "Shit, there might be some out there. I don't know. I don't care." He popped the top of another beer, and then he said, "But how can you not make fun of the backwoods redneck fucks who claim to have actually seen one? They set themselves up. It's too fucking simple." Quinn continued to drive in silence. Nick paid no nevermind because he was too busy drinking beer and being thankful that Quinn had been on time, like he always was, and had saved him a potential ass beating. When they got home, they went inside and watched some sports team score more points than their opponent and got shitty drunk, and they did not go to bed until after the sun came up. When Nick woke up late afternoon the next day, he found a note on the kitchen counter beside the coffee pot. "I made you breakfast, It's in a Tupperware container in the ref. Just nuke it. I'll be out running errands, and when I come home, I'll have more food. Don't worry. I'll be back in time to take you to work, boss. Quinn. A saint, Nick said to himself after reading Quinn's note. The man is a fucking saint. After a couple of cups of coffee, Nick nuked his breakfast and ate it, and then he made himself a Bloody Mary and went outside to sit under the shade of the giant magnolia tree his grandfather had planted 1,000,000 years ago. God, he hated hangovers, but at least in 3 more months when he got off probation, he'd be able to sleep them off entirely like he always had in the past because he wouldn't have his stupid job down at his uncle's stupid radio station anymore. How's that ex-con working out for you? The words rang in Nick's head like a gong. It was the voice of Chick, the head guy of the lawn crew. What? Nick said, turning his head to the left to see Chick making his way over. Chick pulled up a seat and stuffed the cold, hard cash that Nick's parents had just given him for payment for last month's lawn care in his wallet. Chick wasn't an idiot. He knew these rich fuckers hated paying taxes as much as he, one of the truly hard-working men of the world, did. So he gave them 2 prices when they inquired about his services. There was the competitive fair market value price, which he'd offer to customers who paid with a check or credit card. And then there was the deeply discounted price he offered to anyone willing to pay him in cash. Chick made a lot of money, and he didn't give much of it to the IRS because of his scheme, and his customers thought of him as a genius for doing it. They envied the way a man who actually had to work for his money could stick it to the IRS in such a slick way. It wasn't quite as easy for them to do it, with all their trust fund dividend and interest income being fully taxable and all. They hated the IRS for taking so much of what they'd rightly been born into, so they loved the way Chick handled the bastards. He was their hero. That con you've got living with you, Chick said, sitting down and then adjusting his position in his chair, now that his wallet was so much fatter than it had been the last time he'd sat down anywhere. Quinn. What do you mean, con? Nick asked, and then he took a sip of his Bloody Mary. He didn't tell you, Chick said, as much time as you guys spend together? Quinn's not a con, Nick said, surprised at the sound of his own voice. So defensive. It was as if someone had just told him his girlfriend was a slut. He's a damn dependable dude. He always gets me to work on time, and he's never late in picking me up, and he runs all kinds of extra errands and stuff he's not even paid to do. Whatever, Chief, Chick said, rising to leave. Just don't piss him off. Why? Nick asked. He'll beat the living shit out of you like he did that poor bastard in Texas. Did 3 years for that one. Texas? Nick said, sounding incredulous. He's never said shit about Texas. He's from Ohio. Chick laughed so hard he nearly fell down. That fucker's never been to Ohio, he said. Where did you hear all this? Nick said. Dude, Chick said, walking back to get within feet of Nick before speaking again. I hire my guys through the courts and probation officers. These are guys that can't get most jobs due to background checks. I knew this shit about Quinn before I even met him. You've got to be shitting me, Nick said. And all of a sudden he found himself believing what he was being told. Look, Chick said, shrugging his shoulders. People can change. Maybe he has. Just be careful. And then Chick turned and walked away, heading off to collect his cash from the Browns down the road. He loved the Browns because they, too, paid in cash, allowing him to stick it to the IRS. And the Browns loved Chick for doing it because they couldn't, because the poor bastards had been born into extreme wealth and the IRS was all over them. Think you'll get any psycho calls tonight? Quinn asked Nick several hours later on the way to work. I'm sure I'll get a few, Nick said. It's the nature of the beast. Pun intended, Quinn said, and they both laughed. As long as I don't get a call from one specific psycho, Nick said, and he slightly turned his head toward Quinn to see if he could note a reaction. The night will go just fine. Oh, Quinn said after a moment's hesitation, don't worry about that guy. I'll wait outside in the parking lot your whole shift if it makes you feel safer. It's okay, Nick said. That's a long time to sit in a parking lot. Just be on time. If he calls back and makes more threats, I'll call the damn police. Quinn dropped Nick off at the bank and then drove off. Nick hurried up to the office and replaced Jillian, a very lovely woman in her 60s who hosted the B-sides. And no, it wasn't a radio show showcasing big band's lesser-known songs. It was literally a show about bees, honeybees. Jillian was a hippie, and Nick's very rich uncle had the hots for her. So he gave her her own radio show where she could talk about bees. It hadn't paid off for Nick's very rich uncle, as when he pressed Jillian for something in exchange, he found out that she had a girlfriend. And only 500 weekly listeners tuned in for the show, but Nick's very rich uncle kept Jillian and her show anyway because he liked Jillian. And he hoped someday he would be able to turn her. We have something extra special for our listeners tonight, Nick said into the mic as he started his show. Throwback Thursdays. Even though it's Tuesday. That's right. We are going to start the show off by playing some of our best calls from the past. Let's get started with that guy from Pennsylvania who woke up one morning to find a couple of Bigfoot Sasquatches in his recently drained swimming pool. As Nick's listeners were hearing the story told from the guy who called a couple of months back, claiming that he had a suspicion Bigfoot Sasquatch was swimming in his pool at night, so he drained his pool and ended up catching two of the creatures when they jumped into an empty pool on the deep end and ended up breaking their legs and therefore couldn't get out, Nick began Googling the ever-loving hell out of his best good friend Quinn. He didn't dare risk doing so at home earlier out of fear that Chick was most certainly telling the truth, and that Nick had a real psychopath on his hands and his good buddy Quinn, and that real psychopath friend of his might catch him Googling him and take offense to it. Shit, Nick said aloud, before even finding any hits online. He'd glanced over to the side of the desk and saw the note that someone had supposedly given Quinn to pass on to him in the parking lot from the other night. He still had Quinn's note from earlier in the day, the note about breakfast in his pocket. He pulled it out and compared the two notes and saw that the handwriting was identical. Shit, Nick said again, after making the realization, and just because he liked to say the word shit. As the man from Pennsylvania was telling the listeners in his previously recorded audio that of course he didn't call the government men about the Bigfoot Sasquatches in his pool because he knew they'd disappear him if he did, Nick hit pay dirt with his internet search. It turned out that Quinn was from Texas and that he had served 3 years in prison for attempted manslaughter. Quinn read several articles about the case, and as it turned out, Quinn had actually been sentenced to 25 years. However, the man who he'd been convicted of beating almost to death and having put into a coma came out of that coma after Quinn had been in prison for 3 years and told his side of the story, and as it turned out, it was the exact same story Quinn had told. During Quinn's trial, he'd claimed that while his best friend Randy and himself were out camping at South Llano River Park, just outside of Junction, Texas, they'd been attacked and badly beaten by a Bigfoot Sasquatch. Quinn claimed he'd barely been able to make it out alive, and he feared that Randy was dead. There were no witnesses to the incident, and when authorities arrived at the scene, they found Randy beaten so badly that he was in a coma. There were 38 empty beer cans found at the campsite, and Quinn's blood alcohol content came back at more than 3 times the legal limit for driving after testing. Randy's BAC was about the same, but what had put him into the coma was blunt force trauma. Randy had been smacked in the head so hard that it knocked him out, and he stayed out and on life support for 3 years. At the trial, Randy's family had gotten more than 24 anti-character witnesses to claim that Quinn was pretty much the biggest piece of shit on earth, and the prosecutor claimed his whole story about Bigfoot Sasquatch was all being told in an attempt to claim insanity because everyone knew there was no such thing as Bigfoot Sasquatch. In the end, the jury voted unanimously to convict him, and then the judge threw the book at him. However, hear that tree knock? It's bringing them in, just like it always did back in the good old days. I need to take more vacations and do this more often, don't I? However, when Randy finally woke from his coma and was questioned by the authorities, he told the exact same story Quinn had told, and the judge let Quinn out of prison early for good behavior. It was all done low-key so as not to draw media attention, but that one guy who has been kicked off of all the social media sites for blazing every conspiracy theory known to man and who ironically lives in Texas, got word of the release and he went crazy with the story. That's how Nick had been able to find out all about it in the first place here tonight while doing his Google searches. Oh my God, Nick said aloud. I get it. I get how having a Bigfoot Sasquatch encounter can ruin your life. Nick decided he would make things right, and he figured it might be a pretty good way of saving himself from an ass whooping that seemed to be coming his way pretty soon. When the guy from Pennsylvania via replay finished up about how all he could figure was that some other Bigfoot Sasquatches had come to the aid of the two he'd trapped in his pool the next night because they were gone the next morning when he woke up, by God, he swore he was not lying, and the whole damn incident had ruined his life, Nick broke into the show to make a special announcement, an apology. I have a very special statement I want to make tonight, Nick said, speaking into the mic. After a moment's pause, he said, I'm sorry. Nick let another moment pass before continuing, allowing his listeners' ears to prick up fully. I have never claimed to believe or disbelieve in the existence of Bigfoot Sasquatch, he said, being completely honest, and I've always considered myself to be the kind of person who would never make fun of anyone else because of their beliefs. However, I've found myself doing that with many Bigfoot Sasquatch believers lately, and I humbly apologize. I would never make fun of someone for belonging to a specific religion, and I would certainly never make fun of someone due to their ethnicity or sexual preference. It's not okay to make fun of people who believe in Bigfoot Sasquatch either. Nick took a calculated pause before speaking again. He wanted to give what he'd just said time to sink in for his listeners, as well as see if he could get them to focus even more. I've only recently come to understand how having a run-in with one of these creatures could absolutely destroy one's life. And I want to go further and say that if your life has been negatively affected due to your personal encounter with Bigfoot Sasquatch, I wish you nothing but healing. It is to you that I apologize the most, and it is from you that I ask forgiveness. Nick was finished. He'd said everything he could think of to say, and the phone started ringing off the hooks. Believers and non-believers alike were condoning Nick for taking the high road and doing the right thing. No one said anything mean about anyone else who might think differently than them, at least on this night. And Nick's mysterious caller, his swim fan, did not call at all. When Nick's shift was over, like clockwork, Quinn was waiting on him in the parking lot. Nice show, Quinn said as Nick got into the car and took a beer out of the cooler sitting on the floor of the passenger seat. Thanks, Nick said as he cracked the can open. And our mystery caller never called. He came by, Quinn said, handing Nick a piece of paper as he put the car in drive and began making his way out of the bank's parking lot. Nick felt hesitant, but he wanted to get it over with, so he wasted no time in opening the note. You're forgiven, is all that it said. Is this good news, Nick asked Quinn, knowing the proof was always in the pudding, and in this instance, the tone of Quinn's voice would be the pudding. It's good, Quinn said. I don't think you'll have any problems with that guy again. The two of them went home and got blitzkrieg drunk while watching some sports team score more points than another in some sporting event, and they drank beer until the sun came up. Quinn continued driving for Nick until he got his license back, at which time he went back to Ohio for a job opportunity. Nick hated to see Quinn go, but he was also relieved to a degree. He now felt like he could sleep with both eyes shut. Unless, of course, he ever decided to go camping at South Llano River Park just outside Junction, Texas, in which case he knew it would be best to not sleep at all. On second thought, Nick thought, there are just some places he decided he'd never go, and South Llano River Park outside of Junction, Texas, just became one of those places. The end. So there you go, folks. For those of you who have been missing the Bigfoot Sasquatch stuff and the stories, you know, you can get close to 100 of them here. Ebook format on Amazon, or go to our Etsy store. The links to both sites are in the description box below. Hopefully, I stay rejuvenated for a bit before I get burnt out on like being a viral social media content creator on multiple platforms now, in case you didn't know. Have you heard any good jokes lately? Wait, wrong channel, wrong platform. See you next time for more, potentially.